At the end of my time, I was laid off. I was not expecting it. I had never been laid off before. It helped me unpack the belief I had that layoffs are always deserved. Like, that person got laid off because they weren't doing that well. I had a really strong track record and I still got laid off. And it was me now recognizing, like, it really is random. You really can't control some of those decisions. They're going to be made and there's not so much of a human element to them. They're made in a spreadsheet and it's just to cut costs. The person who probably made the decision doesn't know your name.
That is a preview of my conversation with Don McGray. Don is a product marketing leader who's worked at some incredible companies. He led product marketing at Dropbox, Airtable. He's at Vimeo right now. And like a lot of us who spent years working inside fast-moving tech companies, he's seen how easy it is to let work become really your whole identity if you let it. This happens naturally to a lot of us. When you work at a cool company, you're proud of it. And when you're proud of it, you wear the company branded t-shirts and you use the company coffee mugs and you slap some of the stickers on your laptop. It's very natural for this to happen. It becomes a core part of who you are. And this generally is a good thing until something happens. Maybe get laid off, passed over for a promotion. And when stuff like that happens, it hurts twice as much because so much of your self-worth is tied to your work. So this episode is about how to avoid that. A practical playbook for still giving your best at work, leading in, but learning to separate who you are from what you do, which makes everything a lot easier, from making tough calls to receiving difficult feedback and learning to lead through some of these intense, tough moments. Don learned all this stuff the hard way, and you just heard him admit that he once believed layoffs were only the people who deserved it until he unfortunately was laid off. So Don took a different path, right? He didn't just grind harder to prove himself. He learned how to detach his identity from his performance, which we got into that and a whole bunch more in our episode, from getting feedback from a CEO that he had C+ work and how he rebuilt trust. The moment he admitted to another VP, he thought he was in the wrong role and he thought he was going to get let go. We got into all of it. If you're new here, I'm Andrew Kaplan. And in this show, I have honest conversations with product marketing and growth leaders about the toughest lessons in their career so that you can apply them to yours. It's enough from me. Let's go ahead and hear from Don.
So I'd worked through Starbucks all through college. And I was like one of maybe 200 kids that I knew in political science that had a job. Everyone was like, I'm interning this like small campaign in Illinois. I am like the intern to the intern for Barack Obama's like internship. And so I was like, okay, I'm good. I have a job. I'm able to pay my bills. And it took a little while, but I knew after that sort of the right step for me was marketing. So Starbucks was really cool in that they offered opportunities to practice that. Like I could go out and do things that weren't outside of my scope as a store manager. And I basically ended up running Yelp, Google Maps, and Facebook Play, where we would segment based on location and we would sort of say these 10 stores in the region are underperforming. Let's push a coupon that's based on local like fencing, geofencing, and we'll see if we can get these stores back. We saw amazing success. Like we got all the stores back on target. Some of them were now exceeding target.
So you went from, I just want to make sure I understand, because barista, store manager, geofencing advertising campaigns, is that a common thing for store managers or store leads to do? Or is that like a special opportunity that you got?
It's something I carved out, to be totally honest. I said, like, look, I know a lot of people have store managers, their career goal, and they want to move into district and then area kind of management. That's not what I think is the next step. I want to move into marketing. So let's figure out what I can do that kind of gives me some of that exposure and see what happens. And I had a boss who was really supportive of that. And I had enough connections through just like various, honestly, being in the role for a while in corporate, that there were people who were like, I can connect you with this person on marketing. I can connect you with this person on marketing. So it was a mix of getting lucky, having the right connections, and being scrappy and saying like, I'll do this work and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, you can all make fun of me. And if it does work out, hopefully you bring me up to Seattle.
That's pretty cool. And so you go from, I'm going to give the cliff notes of your story for the listeners. You go from Starbucks doing the work that you were just talking about to Pete's, to Dropbox, to Airtable, to Vimeo, which is where you're at now. And so pretty incredible entry point into tech from where you started and what you thought you were going to do.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give like a little anecdote from that time, which is I was working at Pete's. I was managing social customer service and social marketing. So I had a team of about 6 people. We were chugging along, doing great work. And one day I was getting ready to post a job ad for our recruiting team at Pete's. And I saw a job ad for Dropbox for the social media manager. And my immediate thought was, I didn't know anyone worked at Dropbox. It was like a tool where you'd use the feeds, but like you put stuff in it and you don't think about it, and it just works and it's kind of magic. And it stuck with me. Like a week later, I was thinking, how do you market a product that the entire point of the product is that you never think about it? Like, how do you figure that out? And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, I was like, this is so fascinating to me because if Dropbox works, you really only think about it like when you download it and install it. If it doesn't work, you're thinking about it too much, and that's bad. So doing the application, came and did a bunch of interviews, super intense interviews. I remember thinking there's no chance I have this job. And then got the call, hey, like you're our first choice. And so said, I got to take this opportunity. This sounds amazing.
Pretty incredible.
Very lucky, I'll say, on my part. And I think as well, I had a manager who was willing to take a little bit of a chance on someone who didn't have a tech background.
So I'm interested, obviously, in exploring a lot of the journey kind of starting at that point in your career. And so really interested in exploring kind of the intersection of mastering your craft and then also kind of learning the leadership journey and sort of all the skills and the mistakes that are a part there. I'm curious for you, is there a moment kind of as you get going, you're kind of starting on this path where you feel like, hey, maybe I'm in the right spot. Like I didn't plan on being here, but now I'm here and maybe this is going to be okay. Maybe I'll keep going.
Yeah, I can definitely think of the moment that it really clicked for me. And that was about 2 years into Dropbox. I had been promoted a couple of times and the company was growing wildly. Like I think I was like employee 750 around there. And the first year we went to 1200. So it was just wild growth. And it was sort of like all over the place. Like, hey, this week we need a recruiter. So you're going to be the recruiter this week. You're going to learn all about recruiting. You set up interviews, and the next week, like we hired a recruiter. So now you're moving on to this next thing. And on top of doing the day-to-day job. And basically, I had a conversation with my boss where I was like, what's next? I'm ready. Like I'm feeling great. I want to push hard. And she was like, the next role for you is my job. And we talked about it, and she was like, take time and think about it. And like, I'm not planning on leaving for the next year or so. So like, know that there is this pause in your career growth and think about what that means for you. And it really was that sort of moment where I took it home and I was like, this doesn't feel good. I don't want her to feel like I'm just like waiting for her to quit or like slip up so I can like kind of take over. And I came back to her and said, I don't like that. I don't want you to feel like I'm waiting for you to slip up. I don't want to feel like I'm waiting either because I'm impatient and ready to go. And thankfully, at the time, our CMO, who is a woman named Carolyn Feinstein, was like, look, here's the deal. You want to keep moving. We don't want to lose you. We didn't hire you to do this, but take some time, find the role you want, and we'll put you in it. And that was where I came to PMM. And so they had an opening on their PMM team. I interviewed. I felt really good about it. They made the offer for me to join the PMM team. And maybe 6 months into that, I worked on a price increase project for Dropbox Plus. And it was a ton of work. It was like an insane project. It was like super last minute. We went really fast. There were all these moving parts. It was one of those like, we're working Saturdays, we're working sometimes like Sunday mornings to get this done. And the end result was that customers actually retained better after the price increase, and we had positive press. And that was the moment I felt like, okay, PMM is a role where you can really influence the outcome. You can really have a big impact on the customer experience. And you're kind of at the center of everything. And it's hectic and it's stressful, but it's also really fun. It's really fun to be there and say like, okay, I have to make a major decision today. Like, what email are we going with? What exact copy is going to be the final copy? And this is very much, I think what made it even more exciting is very much like a type 1 decision where you cannot go back. Like once you've sent out that first email that your price is going up and you've lifted your press embargo, there's like, you can eventually roll that price back, but that kind of moment, like whatever reaction people are going to have is set. And I think I felt that really keenly at that time of like, there's no going back. I cannot come back to this email in a week and say, oh, like we're gonna make some tweaks. Whereas everything I'd done before then was like very much that kind of like, we're testing it, we're learning. And that to me, really, it was like, okay, this is what I love. Like I kind of love this high stakes, high pressure.
This episode is presented by Navattic. If you've been following me or you're a fan of this show, you know how bullish I am on the interactive demo space and how much I love the Navattic team. Done a ton of stuff with them over the years, and they just dropped a bunch of new features that are really exciting. First, they've got a new template library. You can choose from a bunch of pre-made templates that have the most common demo use cases and all of the best practices built in, help you go 0 to 1 in a few seconds. If you're not sure what to build, they also have a new AI storyboard generator. It's exactly how it sounds. You drop in a website URL or some copy or a landing page, whatever you've got, it reads the information, pulls out the key sections, and then builds a working product demo for you in a couple minutes. And after you've built your demo, you're gonna probably want to use your data as part of your go-to-market approach. They've got a bunch of plug-and-play demo playbooks where you can send that interaction data to your CRM. You can use it to trigger alerts, all kinds of good stuff. It's actually a bunch of the things that my team built manually. It took us forever when I was in-house, so I love this. And after you've built your demo, if you need to make any adjustments, if you're displaying numbers or data as part of that, they have a new table AI feature, which helps you to clean up that data in a more conversational way and at scale in just a few seconds. They have made it so stinking easy to use your product as your marketing tool without needing an engineer or heavy design work. You can get started with all of this in their free plan. Check it out at navattic.com/value to get started. That's navattic.com/value. Why do you think you liked it so much? Like, I feel like a lot of people don't like the stakes, but it sounds like for you, you were motivated by it. Was it the impact? Was it the influence? Was it the excitement of it? Like, what was it that drew you to that work?
There's a couple things. So one of the things that made it challenging was that with that short timeline, I didn't have a ton of levers I could pull. So I had to kind of figure out in that like a very narrow space what levers I could pull in terms of like customer influence. So it was really thinking through the comm strategy. It was really thinking through the messaging strategy. And it was really spending a lot of time talking to customers. We had, I think, 6 weeks from sort of like, should we do this to this is when we'd like to send the first email. And so I spent a lot of that time in partnership with a researcher, literally doing like 5 interviews in the morning on the emails we had written, rewriting emails in the afternoon, and then coming back the next day and just doing that over and over until we were getting like overwhelmingly positive feedback. And so I think that appealed to me on a sort of fundamental level of like, it's fun to try to carve out what you can play with and like what you can do. And sometimes it's like a little bit of an oxymoron, but sometimes those boundaries and those guardrails are actually really freeing because you're like, this is the playing field. It's a very small, but I'm going to play as much as I can in there. And then I've always wondered the second piece, but if it's influenced by it having a good result, but I've always said like, it's fun to play high stakes. Like you feel the pressure, you feel it, and you know that the impact is going to be there from the beginning because if it's low stakes, you know, it's probably going to be like 0.5% either way on the business. And you're kind of like, like this gets my attention, but I'm not going to like sweat over this. Whereas when it's high stakes, like this could make or break the business. You feel that pressure every day. You're like, when we press send on this email, it better be good.
You were made to work in tech.
Sometimes I think so.
Just from like a mindset perspective. I mean, a lot of what I like to listen to in this show is what makes some people successful when in the same environment, others might not be. And what I've worked on, it sounds like at least for part of that, you were just born with it. You like the stakes, you like the action, you like the pressure a little bit. That was just in you, which is really cool. So, I want to double click on a few of these tougher moments here where maybe the stakes were high, you didn't get the win immediately and you had to work for it a little bit more. So one of those times for a lot of us is usually we don't realize what the stakes are until someone gives us feedback and then we go, oh shoot, like I didn't even know I was on the wrong path here. Have you ever had a moment like that along the way? Like maybe a piece of tough feedback that you received that you took with you for a little bit?
Yeah, I can definitely think of this one example, which is I was working on the launch at Airtable, and it was this completely new part of our product. And it was sort of even bigger than a single feature. It was basically launching a new product for Airtable, and it was going to combine with the core product, but it had been in development for 1.5 years. So it was super high pressure in terms of like, this was a huge bet for the company. We really feel like this is like the next stage for the company. And I was on the hook for the entire go-to-market motion.
And how big is Airtable, or at least at the time that we're talking about? I'm just trying to contextualize sort of what size organization we're thinking about.
Yeah, so super interesting there as well. When I joined, Airtable was about 125 people. That first year, we went to 1,000. So I often joke that my first year, all I did was interview people. And then from like 6 to 9, I would do marketing work and then be like coming back for interviews the next day. So about 1,000 people, maybe like 1,200 even by the time we did this, and doing like pretty solid business. Like I want to say it was about 40 or 45 million in ARR.
That's a really fun stage to join a company. I feel like I joined HubSpot right around that stage, probably similar growth trajectory. That's like a really magical time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's fun because it's like that combination of you're often asked to do things you never thought you'd do in the role. You're kind of like constantly figuring out what the edges of your role are. I think there is something about that sort of rapid growth where people really come together. Like you don't have time to play politics and like really worry about like roles and responsibilities. You're really just like, I have 300 other things that my boss has asked me to do this week. I'm just trying to get through this meeting and get action items so I can get it done. And it's also fun because you're doing stuff that's just, you're kind of throwing stuff at the wall in some ways and saying like, hey, 60 of my experiments didn't work out. So I'm going to go back to the drawing board and see what else I can do. But I agree, it's super, super fun.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's no politics because the company's grown so quick. There's so many opportunities that are opening up. And it's like, look, if you get that one, there's going to be like 30 others I could go get. And so it's like, let's just go win together. And so at least that's the energy that I picked up on. So you're working at Airtable. You're on the hook for the go-to-market of this new product they're getting ready to launch.
And so I put together the launch plan, the messaging, the positioning, and I had gotten signed off from my VP. We were feeling good about it. We took it to the CMO, and she's like silent the whole presentation. And then she just says, kind of C+ work.
In the meeting?
Yeah. And I mean, as a Berkeley grad, as a former kind of 4.0 student, it hit hard. I was like C+. I don't know what that means. I'm gonna have to look up that term. But it also felt like, okay, I've done so much work. I put so much effort into the development of the strategy and this plan and everything. And just like her first reaction is, could have been better. Could have been a lot better even. And so I think the number one lesson I learned from it was all of that effort is invisible, especially to executives. It is completely invisible. Like they're aware of it and they can usually speak to the fact that you're doing it, but they don't actually see it and they don't actually feel it. Like that was probably hundreds of hours of customer interviews, of message testing internally and externally to get there. And for her, it was like, I was expecting better. And the second lesson from that, I think that's really important to take home is there's something about walking your executives kind of step by step as you do that. And I think there's a tendency, especially when you're newer to working with executives, to like want to sort of keep them at arm's length and say like, when you see the final result, you're going to be so impressed. And it was something I had to learn was it's actually better to bring them in and be like, when they see where you started and where you've landed, that's when they're like, okay, yes, I see how we got here. I really see how we did this. And I think guiding them on that journey and also having them in the room where you can understand their expectations better, because then the other consequence of this meeting was I had to then do all this follow-up of what do you think A+ work looks like? What are you expecting to see here? Like, what are the elements that you don't like? What do we need to change to get to a place where you feel like really solid in signing off on this launch? Because this is a huge launch for the company and I want everyone to feel great about it. And so it's sort of like this, it's almost going against your instinct, which is like, if I keep everyone out of the project, it'll be easier. And that's like maybe true while you're doing the work, but when you get to that end state and you're presenting the work, it completely blows it up because they're like, I don't know, it looks like you spent maybe 20 minutes on this and you're coming to us to be like, this is our plan. And so I think that was like the big lesson was just bring people in, especially executives, and like figure out the right touch points to kind of keep them updated on the work.
There's almost like this invisible language, I feel like, at the executive level where there's almost like all this back channel conversation. So by the time they present something to each other, they kind of already know where everybody stands and how they're all going to react because they've already shown it to them before the meeting. So there's all this like pre-meeting kind of alignment that happens before the big meeting, but you don't know that. Like that's like an invisible thing that nobody explained to me. I just eventually figured it out because I literally did the same thing. First time I put together a big strategy, spent all fucking weekend on it because like you, I had no time between my 9 to 6 to get it done. Spent 2 full days at a coffee shop cranking it. Big Google Doc, came out of my cave, feeling good, chest up, chin up, going to the meeting Monday morning. And like maybe a minute and a half into the meeting, it was clear like I was way off. And I was like, well, shit, like I got like another 43 minutes in this meeting. Like how, I don't know what's good. And I just remember the room kind of spinning on me, so to speak. That was not good. So I made the same mistake. If we could go back in time, how did you think that was going to go? Like when you walked into that meeting, what was your headspace like then? Were you thinking like, hey, this is going to knock her socks off?
Of course, it was like, I've done all the work. I've checked every box. I have thought about this backwards and forwards. I've got the PM on board. Like, I have engineers who are like, ooh, I love where we've landed on this message. Like, she is going to clap. She's going to put like her everything down and just say, like, Dawn, bravo. You've absolutely crushed this. I've never seen a plan this good, which I think was a little fantastical. But for sure, I think going into it, I had really kind of sought out some of that like peer support, and that's important that they feel like they're brought in and good on it, but I at the expense of executive support. And for sure it was like a lesson I had learned. I had a really amazing lead at Dropbox, who's now the CMO at Figma, Sheila, who was like the expert at this kind of executive handling. Like, and she would be like, hey, before we go on that meeting, like, I'm going to make sure the EA sees it. The EA feels good about it. If there's a chief of staff, they're going to see it. Everyone else in that room is going to be signed off on this, except for maybe the one executive who I've already previewed what we're going to talk about with. And I think it just was one of those things where it became such a part of the DNA at Dropbox and doing that, that when I went to Airtable, I kind of forgot for a minute of like, yes, that back channel is so helpful in sort of like getting it. And then I think it was Sheila who also one time just told me like flat out, she was like, you have to remember your COO, your CMO, this meeting that you just spent a week and a half prepping for, that's 30 minutes, they have like 16 of those a day. So she has a tiny window of context into what you're doing, what your job is, and why it matters. And she's kind of like stuck in that last meeting thinking about whatever, financial projections are coming out. And she's looking at yours and she's saying like, that's not going to hit the number. So there's like that baggage that you're not aware of as well, that you have to keep in mind of like sometimes just taking that pause and saying like, what else have you been hearing? And that's part of bringing that executive in there. They start to share that information with you of like, we're nowhere close to financial projections for the quarter. So like whatever you're doing on this launch, I want to like know how it's going to get us a lot of eyeballs and a lot of traffic to the website.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the show. If you are, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. The data shows something like 40% of the people who listen to the show are actually subscribed. It is the best way for you to support the show, and it helps the algorithm find other listeners who are just like you. If you're feeling generous, a quick rating or review makes a huge difference as well. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. Now let's get back to this episode. And so what you mentioned, some of the lessons and takeaways that you've got here, which I think are spot on and very helpful for folks. What happened in your story though? So you have this presentation, it doesn't go well in the moment. You say, it sort of challenges your identity or sort of what you believe about yourself. You go off after that and you double down on the work, right? You didn't slink away and hide from it. It sounds like you doubled back.
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned some of those steps, but one was to follow up and say like, okay, I missed the mark, and just kind of own that. Like, here's what I feel where I missed, but I want to hear from you. What does A+ work look like?
Did you go back to the CMO with that? Or
Yes.
like, were you reporting to the CMO? It was small enough you could still communicate with them directly.
Yeah. And just say like, what are we missing? And how do I get this to A+? And I think part of it is that stuff is hard. It's so hard to be vulnerable in that moment and say like, I'm going to let go of my own ego and just ask, like, even if I think it's the best work I've ever done in my life, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because she didn't think it was the best work. But I think that vulnerability opened up communication very quickly, where she was like, these are the parts that I think are missing. I want to see more thought about like how we're going to sell into enterprise. I want to see more thought about how we're going to leverage some earned media here. We're kind of like the two major pieces of feedback that like I just hadn't gone into. And then it was able to go back and say like, okay, we're going to rework these components. She had some feedback about the messaging that was just like relatively quick and easy to sort of update and manipulate a little bit. And then go back and present. And she signed off. She was like, now this is what I wanted to see. She was a little withholding. She didn't say it was A+ work. She thought it was A work. But I was willing to take it.
A work's pretty good, man.
Yeah, I was like,
I went to a state school. I could tell you what a C+ looks like.
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the other things I hear a lot about on this show and in my work as a coach are folks who struggle with imposter syndrome. It manifests itself in different ways in different folks. The way I think about it are moments when you question if you're in the right spot, if you belong inside of your role. Have you ever had a period of time where you had a little bit of that?
Yeah, for sure. I think I feel like it's been a part of the conversation, but it could be an even bigger part of the cultural conversation around work. Is like everyone feels this. You feel it randomly sometimes. Like you'll be chugging along, doing great work, and then suddenly one day you're like, that person's out of term and I don't know what it is. Like they use an acronym that I don't think I've ever heard. And suddenly that voice is back in your head, like they know so much more than you. You're not good enough. You're not ready for this. And so I think sometimes it's helpful to know. Just everyone's feeling this at random points in the day and random points in their career. And then the moment that really I think of is sort of an interesting one because, to be quite frank, it was true. I was not in a good position. And so I had moved into a paid media planning role at Dropbox at one point where the paid media team had really come to me to say like, hey, we need you to do some planning for us. And we need someone who can really kind of knows channels and knows how paid media works and can help us plan better. And I got maybe like 6 to 8 months into the role. And I was really excited when I joined. And I just got into it. And it was like, I wasn't crushing it. Like I felt like it was an uphill battle every day. It felt like it was playing against my skill set. Like it was very much like a don't go and meet with people and get alignment. It was much more of a like everyone gives you numbers, you crunch those numbers and you come back with a spreadsheet that tells them what to do. And you don't get to sort of like have debates about strategy because everyone's just going to base it off the numbers. And then the final piece was it just felt like scope wise, as I kind of like discovered in that role, it was getting smaller and smaller. And so it was less planning like strategically and more just like crunch the numbers kind of an analytics role. And I was feeling terrible about it. Like it was really stressful, really bad. It was starting to come out in the work. Like I could feel like I was getting kind of grouchy and like snippy with people and I was avoiding doing the actual work. Like people would send me something. I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it next week. And so just kind of like sit there and be like, oh, I really don't want to do that. And at the time, I had a really excellent career coach who was like, you have to be brave and you have to go to your VP who brought you into this role and tell her it's not a good fit. And it's going to be terrifying because there's a non-zero chance that she thinks you're doing great. And you're telling her, like, you're drawing attention to yourself that you're not doing great. And she coached me through it. You know, we did practice conversations. We talked about like what's the worst outcome that could be, like what does that mean for you, and what's the best outcome, and like how do we plan for best outcomes. And basically, I went into our one-on-one and said like, hey, here's what I'm feeling. I'm gonna lay it out. I don't feel like this is the right fit for me. I feel terrible for like taking on a role and not knowing and finding this out because I feel like I've wasted your time. I feel like I've wasted my time. And she thankfully was basically like, I think you're doing okay. I don't think you're doing great. And I don't see you being happy. Like the person who joined this role is very different from who you are today. Like in terms of just like happiness, the passion you're bringing to the role. And thankfully she was good enough to be like, let's find you something that is a better fit. And like, let's find you places you can land. And so I was able to go back into PMM pretty quickly after that and say like, okay, this is a really solid fit.
What a good coach, man.
She's amazing. I still use her on occasion when I feel like I need like a little brushing up on skills.
We all do. Yeah, everyone needs brushing up. Yeah.
For sure. She's really good at just sort of that tactic of like, what's the worst that could happen and what would that mean is always so helpful because like, I think our minds naturally want to avoid exploring that. But when you go down and it's like, the worst that could happen, like, it's not like she's gonna be like, you're fired. Today's your last day, goodbye. Like, that's not reality. That's a fear I have, but that's not real.
Yeah. And she encouraged you to do it and she helped you to map out what do you want and how do we plan for that? And if we don't get exactly what we want, what's most likely to happen and what will we do if that's what happens? For anyone who hasn't worked with a coach, that's what it's like when you work with a good one. And that's really cool. And so it helped you to get to an outcome that you wanted, right? You had an idea of what good looked like. You said you role played the conversation a little bit. I assume you had to still be super nervous walking into that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it hits on everyone's fears, right? Like you're going to someone senior and telling them, like, I'm not doing a good job. And I want you to notice that and change things with me. And so it's like it activates that imposter syndrome in a way that I think sometimes is like more intense than we're used to because you're giving into that voice in that moment. And then I think being that vulnerable is really, really hard, especially when you're in a new role. Like you're kind of fresh and you have that battle of instincts between like, do I push through this? Do I just keep going and like eventually I'll get there? Or like, do I call it quits? And I think that battle is so hard sometimes to know because you're like, you have all this noise in your head about it. And I think sometimes it is that moment you got to trust your gut. Like you got to really just say like, I mean, similar to the coaching conversation, like if I push through and this is like best case scenario, am I happy in that scenario? Like, no. And that was the answer for me. It was like, I'm not, even if I end up being the best at this job, it's playing against what I like doing at work. And so that was like a big signal for like, I have to have this conversation.
Hey, real quick, if you've been enjoying this episode, I'm going to take a wild guess that you're a marketing, product, or growth team lead, which is also my background. And when I first started leading my very first growth team, I have never been more stressed and worked harder and longer in my career because I didn't really have the right system in place. I said yes to everything, and suddenly I was in every single meeting and all the decisions were flowing through me. And I still had my own individual contributor workload on the side. And eventually I stumbled into something that I now call my growth operating system. It's basically a plug and play framework with templates and rituals and how to structure meetings and how to create and document your strategy so that your team can move faster, you can run more experiments, you can win more without you being the bottleneck. So if any of that sounds like you and you're looking for some support, check out my growth operating system at deliveringvalue.co/OS if you want to have more impact and influence without working around the clock. It's deliveringvalue.co/OS. I'd love to hear what you think. I feel like so many people don't ask themselves, like, what do I really want? Like, not what's available, not what looks good, not what'll market myself good, but like, what do I actually want? I'm working with a couple of folks right now who are going through this that have these amazing opportunities on paper to get this big title and more responsibility. And we've spent time exploring it. And like, when it really cuts down to it, they don't really want it, but they feel like they have to go for it, or it will show, that they're going to look a certain way, or it'll look like lack of ambition, or it could set them up for something that they don't necessarily want today or see today, but could set them up for something good down the road. It's hard to do. What would you say to someone who's listening to this, that's feeling some of those feelings on the inside, that's in that position that you were, that's in a role that isn't really serving them anymore, but is scared, that's scared to take that next step and to be vulnerable in the way that you were?
I think immediately of, I have a friend who led a career workshop outside of her normal job where there's sort of like 9 things she's identified. And I don't know if I can recall all 9 of them, but it's like, there are people who really, they work for the cash, like, and that's okay. If that's what you want, then like, that's what you're going to pursue and you're going to make other trade-offs. Some people care a lot about title. Some people care a lot about like moving up into management and having a bigger team over time. And basically sitting down and identifying what those things are and just being really honest with yourself of like, okay, I really care about this. When I did that exercise at the time, the things that really stood out to me, I cared a lot about cash. Like, it was like, I want to make a lot more money. I didn't care about title. I was like, it just didn't appeal to me. Like, when I thought about it, I was like, I don't care if my title is director or lead or head of, because from my perspective, it's all meaningless. Like, people have really different titles for different scopes. And then I cared a lot about the people I worked with. So like, for those were like the 2 for me that really stood out. And so then it was much easier to plan through that, to say like, I'm not going to take a job that pays less right now. Like, that's not the right direction. I'm not going to take a job where they're sort of like, internal culture is very much like competitive against each other, or like, we're not all in it together. Like, these are the things I'm going to look for in interviews to say like, that aligns with what I've outlined as what matters to me. And I think the other piece of that is important that maybe doesn't get said enough, that changes a lot. Like, I think now I probably wouldn't put cash first. I would definitely put people really high on that list, because I'm like, I want to work with people who I feel like we're working towards the same thing. We're working towards similar goals. And we're not trying to like wait for someone to slip up so we can get like a little bit more land in our area, but rather it's like, we win together or we don't win at all. And so those are things that when I'm interviewing or when I'm talking to companies, I really think about. It's like, does this sound like a place where it's like a lot of politics, a lot of like land grabbing? Or is this a place where it's like, hey, that win you just had, let's all celebrate it because that's good for the company.
Did you read the book, Radical Candor?
Yes.
So I read that book twice in 2 different book clubs, and I feel like everyone over course corrects the other way after reading it and is like kind of mean to each other and thinks that they're doing a good job. And eventually everybody settles back in. But I'm bringing it up not for that reason, but because in the book, she talks about these different phases of your career. You have periods where you're a rock star, where you just kind of want to do good work and happy to work 9 to 5, but you got stuff going on outside of work. And then you have other periods where you really want to double down and kind of go for that superstar stuff. And that's kind of what you're saying. You go through different periods where you prioritize different things and your needs change and your relationship to work changes a little bit. And that's okay. That's part of this. And you were kind of recognizing that yours had changed a little bit.
I think you had Michael Leibovich on, and something, he and I worked together at Vimeo, and we used to kind of talk about and joke about, everyone looks at it as a career ladder. Like, it's like you just climb up and it's straight up, and it's a career jungle gym. Like, you're going to crawl in every direction. You're going to go in unexpected ways. And sometimes the right choice is like exploring and doing something that feels way out of your wheelhouse. And you're like, I don't know. And sometimes the answer comes back and you've done it and you're like, I hated that. I know I don't want to go down that path. And that's also like really positive signal.
I think about it almost like the game Chutes and Ladders, where you climb up some ladders, and then it's not like you just keep climbing straight up. There's like, if you want to keep going up, it's actually like there's other ladders and you got to like jump over to them. And sometimes you don't know that there's a chute there and you fall back down there, and that's just all part of it. You got to go laterally a little bit. So going back to this moment that we're talking about, one of the other things that stood out to me is that it's pretty high stakes for you, right? You don't know how it's good. You know, we know the ending of the story now, but going into that meeting, you didn't know. What did navigating that teach you about how to handle these vulnerable, difficult conversations where the stakes are high?
I think one of like the major life lessons for me as I go through my career is like leaning into vulnerability. I think it's one of those things that it almost has never kind of like come back to bite me. It's always been a positive. And like, I think there is a tendency in the way we work and just being at work to sort of like build up barriers between us and other people. And that vulnerability really breaks that down and kind of reminds us like, we're all human. We're all just trying to get through this day together, and we don't have the right answers. And I think there's like a tendency internally to look at other people and be like, wow, look, like they're the CMO of this company and I worked with them and they were pretty junior when I worked with them. They must be amazing. But if you talk to that person and you open up that vulnerable space, you'll often find out they're like, I got fired from the company we worked at together. I got fired from my next company. I didn't work for 6 months. I did some consulting, and then I got lucky and I got like a CMO role here, and that translated into this CMO role and this CMO role. And so I think being vulnerable and leaning into it is such a good practice for like, one, yourself, because people often lend a lot of grace to you, and two, it helps build those relationships and remind you that everyone's human, which kind of like going back to imposter syndrome. I think part of that is we look at other people's external stories and we say like, oh, that's the true story. And it's not. Like, you fall down a lot in careers, you make mistakes, you have days where you like want to close the laptop and walk away and never come back. And I've had those at every job, like even the jobs that I look back now and say like, that was the best job I've ever had. Like, that was so much fun. I know if I'm being more honest with myself, there were days that I closed the laptop and was like, I'm not coming back here tomorrow. I'm so done with this place.
What would you say to someone who's listening to this that feels that way now? Or maybe they've had a couple of those over the last year. This has been a hard, maybe 16 months to work in tech. Even if you're at a winner, I feel like right now, if you're at a winner, maybe it's even harder than being at a company that isn't, growing at an astronomical rate. I feel like there's a lot of folks that are burned out, that, they've been on wage freezes. They've been nervous about losing their job. They probably had many of those days recently. What do you want them to hear?
I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I think what I have found helpful is, one, in terms of like the macroeconomic structure and what's going on, like the pressures that companies were feeling and that they're passing down to their employees, is to take a step back and realize like you truly have no control. Something that was really hard at Airtable, at the end of my time, I was laid off, and it came as like a super surprise. I was not expecting it. I had never been laid off before. And I think one of the things that was good about it was it helped me unpack like a belief I had that layoffs are always deserved. Like, that person got laid off because they weren't doing that well. And I had a really strong track record at Airtable of like success and having metrics, and I still got laid off. And it was me now recognizing like, it really is random. And I know like as well that my leads were fighting for me, like up until the company was like, no, there's no chance. And so I think that is one thing to really think about. It's like, as much as that can be stressful, it's also like, you really can't control like some of those decisions. They're going to be made, and there's not so much of a human element to them. Like, they're made in a spreadsheet. and it's just to cut costs. And so like not taking it personally before it happens, like not kind of guiding your choices by like, if I do this, I won't get laid off. Or if I execute on this and I get these results, I won't get laid off, because that's not true. And then when it happens, also recognizing like the person who probably made the decision doesn't know your name. Unfortunately, they just made a call and said like, hey, we're going to cut that salary and put it into our AI venture. I think the other piece that I think a lot about in tech currently is, I think there's like a question that maybe hasn't been asked enough of companies and of individuals, is like, why did you come to tech? And is tech really where you want to be? And I mean that like both of the companies, of like, sometimes I see companies and I'm like, that's not a tech company. You just got VC funding and you threw AI on your product. And like, I get it. You wanted to make money, but I think if you're working at a company and you feel that way, if you do that analysis, that's like maybe a big red flag. It's like, okay, this company shouldn't really be a tech company. They just kind of slapped tech on top of their business proposal. And then for individuals, I think it's good to ask, like, do I enjoy the things that tech represents? And there's trade-offs there, right? Like it is high paying, it is fast paced, which are things I like. There are also moments that I look back and I think in marketing, like there are some marketing fundamentals that I think tech sometimes misses, where I'm like, I miss working in CPG where everyone knew some of these just like fundamental things about marketing and we could kind of have those conversations. And I think asking yourself that, I mean, for me, I've asked myself after Airtable, I was like, do I want to find another tech job, or do I want to like go back to CPG? Do I want to go back to another industry? And I think it was just good to have that answer. And I think it's okay to ask yourself. And then I think the final thing is like, try to have fun with it. It's a wild time. Tech is always wild. Like I think that's one thing. Maybe you can relate to this, but millennials are hardened by economic turmoil. We're not super sensitive to it because we've felt it a lot, unfortunately. But I think it is about like, plan for what you can plan for, and then like have fun with it. And like, it sucks. Like it sucks to get laid off. It sucks to be working at a company and feel like you can't leave because there are no jobs. But also like, wallowing in that feels good in the moment, but it just makes you more stressed out.
Hey, if you're enjoying the stories on this show and feeling like you're ready to tackle some of your own hurdles, I'm here to help. If you didn't know already, I offer one-to-one coaching specifically for people who work on or around growth teams who want to have a bigger influence and impact in their roles. Maybe you're navigating some tough moments, whether it's managing your team or handling feedback. Maybe you just want to step into a bigger leadership role. Or maybe you're at a unicorn company today and you want to make sure that the company doesn't outgrow your skill set. Either way, I can help. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, head to deliveringvalue.co/coaching to learn a little bit more and set up a call with me to see if we jive. All right, enough from me. Back to the episode. I was reflecting on this recently. I feel like millennials, sort of the first generation where, like, our parents' generation worked one job for a really long time. And that was a noble thing to do. Even some of our VPs probably worked a lot of the same jobs for long stretches of time. And then we were hired in, and we're sort of instilled in this, like, hey, you're part of the family type energy. You know, you got all the t-shirts, you got all the swag. It was like a big part of your personal identity. It was like where you worked. If it was a cool place, you told people about it. And during our career, that changed. Where now the younger generation, they don't expect to work at a place for 4 years. They probably expect to work there maybe 2.5, something like that. Then they'll bounce around. And so we've been this generation that have sort of tortured ourselves a little bit. At least that's how I felt, where when I've gotten laid off, it felt heavier. And I think it needed to be. You know, I've been laid off twice. And when I got laid off, I thought it was like the end of the world. Like I got laid off from cool companies, and that made me feel like I wasn't cool, type of a thing. And so I've had to learn how to separate out, keep a little more emotional distance between myself and my work and my identity and my profession and things like that. I'm speaking from my truth, not yours, but I'm curious, one, if any of that resonates with you, and two, after going through a layoff yourself from a company where you didn't see it coming, a cool company by all standards, if you've had to learn to keep a little bit more of that distance as you continue onward.
100%. That definitely resonates with me. And I think that was something that career coach, who's named Gita, really was sort of like, in a way where I didn't bring it up, but she was like, hey, you need to build distance between you and your job. Like, your identity is way too closely attached to like your success at work. And you need to build resilience of like things are going to happen at work that you have no control over, and you're going to get beat up occasionally. And you can't like spend the next 3 days being like, what happened? What did I do wrong? Like, then you have to just say like, okay, like that sucked. That was a shit meeting and I'm moving on. Like, I'm going to come back tomorrow with better results.
Yeah, because you worked with a coach, right? So it probably gave you some ideas or like a ritual or a mindset. There are folks listening that are suffering.
Yeah, I think the first step was really just like honestly doing a lot of thinking about it of like, why do I feel this way? Like, why do I feel such a connection to my job? And part of it was at the time, like it was really heavy at Dropbox, but it was partially like we were working, 9 to 7, 9 to 8, sometimes Saturday. And so it was a big part of my identity, in that it was like when I think about the people I spend the most time talking to, it's my coworkers. And some of them are still like really close friends. And I think there's an aspect of that that is sort of just making some intentional choices. So for me, that was like, Fridays, I'm going to leave at 5. Like, I'm out. I don't care what's going on. Like, I don't care if we're having a big happy hour. I just, for my own health, I have to be out at 5. I'm going to try to limit the amount of times I'm here late when it's possible. Like when my job isn't demanding it. And if I can go home and jump on a screen, that like physical distance and that, I guess, digital distance is really helpful in saying like, okay, I don't feel so like connected to everyone in the room. I think the second piece was doing some just like actual writing down of like things I was grateful for outside of work. And then from that list saying like, let's spend more time doing that. So for me, the easy ones were cooking, doing pottery, hanging out with friends. And so it was like easy to say like, okay, I'm gonna spend more time cooking. Like I'm gonna cook dinner in 6 weeks. I'm gonna sit down this weekend and I'm gonna plan out the whole week. And I'm gonna tell my coworkers I'm not gonna be available after 5 because I have to go home and cook this meal. I think the second piece in that, like pottery, was really helpful in just like leaning into saying like, I have a class on Wednesdays at 7, and then I am unavailable Saturdays from like noon to 5 because I'm doing additional pottery. Hanging out with friends, very easy to just build into your life. But I think doing that work of listing out like what are things that make me feel really good that aren't work related was helpful.
I feel like a lot of folks kind of feed themselves last when it comes to that stuff. They fill their cup last. And so they give everything to the job. And especially when things kind of easy to say that maybe when things are going well, hey, I'm going to do this thing, but it's very easy to just schedule over the lunch that you carved aside for yourself and things like that. And so it's nice. What's nice about your examples is that they're physical things that you need both hands to do and like can't be doing other stuff when you're doing things with your hands. And that's really nice. Woodworking is my version of that. I'm also into some DIY and kind of around the house type stuff. I think it's nice to have hobbies like that.
Yeah, I definitely, I tell people all the time, I'm like, take up gardening. Like, it's the most fun and the most boring thing you'll ever do, but it's really rewarding. It's something you kind of can't be distracted doing. Like just the nature of it is so physical, and so like you have to be present while you're doing it. And I think finding something that does that, like for me, pottery is that. Like if you're distracted for a second, you're gonna throw a bad pot. Like you're gonna have a wog people, like an uneven plate. And so you kind of learn as you progress through that, like you have to really focus. And I can't even be thinking about like what's going on across the room, let alone like how I'm going to solve this massive like revenue problem.
Earlier in our conversation, you were talking about sort of like the Instagram versus reality of getting to meet some people who've maybe made it to VP or the C-suite or whatever, and kind of hearing about the reality of their journey there, how it's full of bumps and bruises. When I look at your background, I see that. I see the Instagram version. I don't, until you shared, I didn't know you were laid off at Airtable. I look at the companies you've worked at, big Silicon Valley companies that are very impressive that other folks recognize. It would be easy for someone like you not to come on this show and air out any of this stuff. Why in the world did you say yes to come on? Why is sharing this important?
I think it helps open up that conversation, right? And it helps break down that myth of like, oh, everyone's career is just like a smooth road to the top. And I think I was lucky to have some leaders early on who were very honest, who were like, I can think of my VP of marketing at Pete's who was like, I work in TV production and that all went belly up, like with the internet. She'd worked at like Discovery, CBS, like PBS, like all of these big companies. And she was just like, it got cut by 80% with the internet. Like people just weren't interested in making shows in the same way. And so I had to pivot into CPG and like really learn a new business. And she was also in her 50s, I think, when that happened. So she was very open about that. And I think that to me kind of helped it click and like unlock that. Like, okay, I'm really only seeing like the smoothed out version. And I think having that conversation more just helps everyone know that like what you see on someone's resume or LinkedIn is not even close to like how many bumps along the way they have.
And as you reflect on our conversation and just sort of look back, what do you think is the through line or the connective tissue between some of these tough moments and the moments of some of your biggest professional and personal growth?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, and I think it is for me, it has been that like vulnerability. It's like being willing to stand up in front of a team, in front of your company, and say, like, I'm stumped on this, or like this didn't go well. It just really helps you build that connection. And when you have that connection with other humans, you're gonna do better work and they're gonna help you do better work. And I think it's sort of like almost like you're taught not to be that way.
It goes against every instinct, right? They hired me to be the expert. I'm the manager of this team. Why in the world would I tell both the people who hired me that I don't know what I'm doing and my team that I don't know what I'm doing? Nobody's going to listen to me. I'm going to be completely got as a fraud. That's like the internal dialogue that I would have.
For sure, 100%. You're like, I've been told like you gotta suck it up, you gotta like fake it till you make it. And I think unlearning that was really good for me to say like, okay, like the more I am open with being like, here's what I've done, here's what I think we should do. And also I'm open to hearing everyone else's ideas because maybe you have a better idea. I think part of it is letting go of your own ego and saying like, yes, I was hired to like lead this component or like this function, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert on everything in that function. And especially as you get more senior, you get like further and further away from like the trend. And so I think that's one big leap is you have to realize like some of my team are actually the ones who know what's going on more than I do. Like they're more up to date on like, this is the latest in life cycle. This is the latest in brand marketing. And then also just sort of opening that door and saying like, maybe I don't know. Like maybe there's something out here that is really interesting and like I can learn from other people. I can learn from someone who did the exact same things I did, but just had slightly different results. Like they made similar choices and they saw like a slightly different pattern. And that's interesting to explore and see like, why did that happen?
Anything that you haven't said that you want to say directly to the
Ooh.
listeners? Takeaways from your story,
Ooh.
from your journey?
I think I would say like the things I've learned in my career are keep trudging through, like just keep beating at it and then be vulnerable whenever you can, like be more authentic and more honest than you think you comfortably can be. And I think you'll find success in that.
Don, thanks for coming on and sharing your journey and your lessons and a few of the speed bumps. If there are folks listening that want to learn more about or connect with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a great place to connect.
Perfect. We'll put links to that in the show notes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.